Because of all the spiritual and metaphysical books that I've read, the fifth dimension of our consciousness is love based, it's soul based. There's no ego. And I thought that's where I think I live. That's why I meditate every day and how I try to stay whole for myself. But most of the world is in 3D, and that's fine. But I thought, what if we could help people raise their frequency and become more aware of this fifth dimension that is love-based?
Ginny Clarke is a consciousness leadership expert, former executive at Google, and author of Career Mapping. With over 35 years of guiding Fortune 500 companies and high-performing leaders, she's developed the 5 dimensions of conscious leadership. In this conversation, we explore her framework of fifth dimensional leadership and why leading from love might be exactly what workplaces desperately need right now.
It was probably in my second or third year with Google. Google was my last corporate gig before building my own business. I needed a place to integrate these ideas of consciousness, spirituality. They're different, but for me, there's an intersection into the work that I did and how I look at leaders. And the one person that stood out, I was like, what did he have? And it was self-awareness. And to me, that is one of the foundations of who are you? You want to be a leader, then to me, you got to know who you are to be a successful leader.
Ginny explains how the workplace could become a training ground for human consciousness.
I think the hardest one for people to understand is expanding that consciousness. I heard a definition recently that's the distinction between perception and perspective, and how we can shift how we think, how we perceive aspects in the world just by the focus of our attention and having a layer of understanding of our own awareness.
If you've ever felt like there has to be a better way to work, lead, and live, this episode offers a radically different paradigm.
I think the point is that we have so much more influence. I started to say control, but that sounds almost manipulative, right? We have more power, let's say it that way, over ourselves and the outcomes in our life than we realize. We're creating this life versus I think too many people feel as though they're victims of circumstance. I'm not. I'm a deliberate creator.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Ginny, what's up? It's great to see you.
Great to see you, Scott. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a conversation I've been much looking forward to. And just to kick this off, I mean, when did this whole conscious leadership idea and theme really come alive for you?
You know, it was probably in my second or third year with Google. Google was my last corporate gig before building my own business. So I started there in 2016 and left in 2020. And couple years in because I'd been an executive recruiter for many years before going to do executive recruiting for Google. And so I'd seen thousands of leaders, interviewed, assessed them, but now being in-house brought new meaning. And looking around within Google and seeing how many brilliant people were there, but also seeing, and it's not unique to Google, I'm not disparaging them, but just really seeing how a lot of people who were brilliant didn't always make the best leaders. And I think intellectually people would say, well, yeah, it takes specific leadership skills and all those things. I use the term competencies. That's one thing. And we can talk about that later. But the conscious part became important. And I'm actually checking myself because the conscious part, I started my own spiritual journey in the 90s after my father passed away. And a few years later, my mother passed away. She left us a month after I had started at Spencer Stewart. And I had also started working with, right after my dad died, a shaman, a healer, he's also a therapist, and I've worked with him for since then, so 30 something years. And I needed a place to integrate these ideas of consciousness, spirituality. They're different, but for me, there's an intersection into the work that I did and how I look at leaders. And so there was a moment where I was interviewing someone in my early days at Spencer Stewart, and I thought, wow, this guy really shines. Some of these other people, even though they had really impressive resumes, didn't impress me. And the one person that stood out, I was like, what did he have? And it was self awareness. And to me, that is one of the foundations of who are you, right? You want to be a leader, then to me, and I welcome your insights on this. You got to know who you are to be a successful leader. That's where it starts. So that became the beginning of the my journey and exploration into what conscious leadership was going to mean for me and the work that I did.
I love that. And I want to dig in a little bit here with some specificity. Like, how does that show up in a conversation with the leader where someone's like, oh, that person has high self-awareness?
For me, it was kind of simple, and it caught me off guard because there was almost something energetic. If you want to get kind of
Oh,
metaphysical
that's
about
very
it,
real.
right?
I'm down to go there.
Yeah, and I don't know that people allow themselves. I'm an empath. You're an empath. We don't think about those things. We don't necessarily, and you don't have to talk about it, but I think it's important to acknowledge how does someone make you feel when you're in their presence. And this individual was very comfortable with himself. And I think he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was speaking, he was pure of heart. You could tell there was just a vulnerability, an openness, a willingness to share what he knew, what he didn't know. There was no bravado. It was, here's how I've helped other people. This is what leadership means to me. Here's what I value. Here's what I believe in. And that's that was like that guy, you know? Of course, he needed to know the subject matter. He needed to be somewhat of a domain expert, if not, highly competent. But those became the things that I tended to focus on. And I will also say that over my own spiritual journey, I've developed a pretty high sense of intuition, pretty acute sense. So I kind of know, I see into people. I'm guessing you have that superpower. I make people uncomfortable sometimes because um, I can spot a phony.
I definitely know what you're referring to, and it's so funny in this culture of like show your best, hide the rest that we've been indoctrinated into. That the most magnetic people are the ones who are actually very revealing
That's right.
and are very comfortable with themselves.
Yes. Hmm.
And I've heard I heard you talk about in your this kind of paradigm shift of moving from like evaluating people and like whether that's in a recruiting context or just like who you want to do stuff with,
Yeah.
moving from what you've done to who that person is. And I think a lot of us like that idea, but we're still like kind of so stuck in like, well, what is this what you've done world.
Right. Yeah.
And so how do people get comfortable with this, like who this person is in terms of determining like that as a criteria for collaboration?
Well, I mean, I think it means you can ask different questions, different kinds of questions, and so there are sort of two ways of looking at this that I think are complementary. One is around the competency-based questions, as I mentioned, and to me, competencies, my definition is that they are the deconstructed element of how you do something. So it's not just that you've done it, because very often, as you're saying, in this world where it's like, tell me what you've done. Okay, but how did you do it? You could have left a dead bodies in your wake. Um, so the how becomes really important. So asking those competency based questions that are very simple. give me an example. Tell me a time when. Here's a hypothetical situation. And then just how. How did you do that? So you said that when you got to this other country to lead that office, that you got started and did it. But how did you establish trust? How did you gain favor with these people they'd never worked with an American before? So it's those things that can be so utterly revealing. I always say that people, I would always ask people in interviews, and when I was a Spencer Stewart, tell me about yourself. That's how I'd start the interview. And they're like, well, my resume. I'm like, no, I read it. Tell me what's not on here. And people would stumble. A lot of people didn't have a strong narrative. And so that's one of the things that I really encourage people to do. It's you need to figure out who you are and know what your story is. And I don't think a lot of people even take the time to have a narrative that they can share. Like today, I want to be able to share with you aspects, and I already have, of who I am, how I got to think the way I think, how I got to be the way I am, how I made choices about my career holistically, so that you can have a view of how that might translate into what needs you have or your client might have, for a particular kind of individual.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And it's also, that depth is where connection is, right? And that's what I think so many of us want out of our careers, is to feel connected to our work, connected to the people we're working with, connected to a mission or purpose. And you're not going to get that if you just look at bullet points on a resume.
Check, check, check. Yeah. No,
What
it doesn't work for either party. It's not a good, if the process isn't robust, the outcome isn't likely to be robust.
I love that. While we're here, I know that you just had a feature in Brene Brown's new book, which is, congratulations on that, exciting. This powerful distinction between management and leadership. Could you talk about that? Because this is again one of those things that's just kind of like a fuzzy area that I don't really think many people think critically about.
Yeah. So I did on my YouTube channel, I did a video well over a year ago, probably even 2 years ago. And I met Brene at a conference where we were both speaking in March of this year. And she introduced me to the audience that she was addressing. It was a small sort of subset. And I was really tickled because we'd never met, right? And then we said, well, we'll stay in touch. And she reached out a few months later and said, I went down a rabbit hole watching a bunch of your videos, and the one on managing versus leading was really meaningful. And would you be willing to talk about it, transcribe the conversation, and put that in my book? And this was June of this year that she reached out, and I had no idea that the book was actually coming out in September. So I was thrilled. But she had a strong point of view coming into this conversation. She told me what it was. And she said, I don't think we need managers anymore. I think they're irrelevant and just kind of get in the way. And so I started the conversation, and you can get the book and read it for yourself, because it's a pure transcription. Basically, I said, I studied linguistics in college, linguistics and French, okay? And so I said, I'm going to give you a definition. Here's a definition of leadership. I read it from the dictionary. Here's a definition of management. And then I layered in a slide that I often use when I'm speaking to audiences when I speak. I said, here's an article that breaks down the skills, and they use the term skills. I prefer competencies. It was from, I think, Financial Times or something. And it was saying there's overlapping skills, and they tend to be around problem solving, communication. I think those, and there's probably a third one I'm not thinking of right now. Leaders' focus is setting the vision, assuming the risk. The leaders do that typically, right? And they influence. Managers are overseeing tasks. So, and the operational elements, right? That's what managers do. Those are distinctly different subsets. And then, as I say, and then there are some shared ones. So I was giving Brene the example of, during my time at Google, I had 3 separate teams. is part of the executive recruiting organization. And I said, I managed the 6 direct reports that reported to me. There were, it wasn't 2 per team, but it was 6 of them. But I led all 3 teams. We met as a group, and I led that team. I set forth the vision. I assumed the risk. But in terms of the management, the day-to-day, that happened through my direct reports. And I met with them weekly, and probably usually more often than that, to understand what was happening. And I was staying close to what the needs of our clients were and our deliverables. And so as we talked about it, Brene, all of a sudden, initially she pushed back and got really frustrated because she was seeing that I was right in at least, a textbook definition. And then she got almost, as she describes in the book, kind of emotional because in her own experience, she recognized that she had had really strong managers. She had had some people in her life who were distinctly management and were very good at it. And that was my point. It's like you've got different skill sets. I think the best leaders have strong managerial capabilities, but they know when to delegate and to hand off. And similarly, you've got some great managers who show some leadership competencies and capabilities. So there's room for both. And I even think people are saying, I've seen so many articles, well, with AI, you don't need a manager. Again, I'm not so sure, because who is helping people? We're still going to have people, right? Unless everything is just robots. And I can't imagine at some point, then that means humans are extinct. That's a little farther out. But in the meantime, people need guidance. The smartest people need feedback. They need direction. They need development and growth. They want that from an employer, from a leader, and from a manager if they can get it. But I think for managers, they're the ones on the ground in the moment who have the ability to give that feedback that's going to help them get better, whatever it is they do.
Yeah, such a powerful frame, and I agree with you. We do need both. You need people that are just making sure things get done, and then the visionaries and the people out there that are kind of charting the path forward. It is a distinct skill set, and it kind of brings me to my next point that I wanted to get into, which is this 5D leadership concept that you've been pioneering, and I know it's also something you've been writing about. Let's start here. What is 5D leadership?
Yeah, well, um, because of all the spiritual and metaphysical books that I've read, the 5th dimension of our consciousness is love based. It's soul based. There's no ego, and I thought that's where I think I live. That's why I meditate every day and how I try to stay whole for myself. But most of the world is in 3D, and that's fine. That's where their frequency is. That's fine. But I thought, what if we could help people raise their frequency and become more aware of this 5th dimension that is love based? I mean, it means that we have to have different values, frankly. So anyway, that's how and it's the trademark is pending for 5th dimensional leadership. I've been working on it for a few years now, and it's almost there. But then it meant it sort of triggered this need for, okay, so what are the dimensions then of a conscious leader associated with this 5th dimension? And so the first one for me was hearkening back to that experience with that person I was interviewing of having self-awareness. It's know yourself, right? I avoided the biblical reference of thyself, but know yourself. Speak your truth is number 2. Inspire love is number 3. Number 4 is expand consciousness. So be curious. That's a simplistic view, but seek to always go beyond what your current perspective might be. And then lastly, it's activate mastery. And we tend to think of masters as, great golfers or the best athletes or whatever this thing is. Or you might think in terms of, spiritual masters who have perfected, just reached some level of nirvana or Buddha or whatever. I'm saying for you to master yourself, who you are today, because we're dynamic beings. And so it's a challenge to push yourself. How can I be better today? And it's not in terms measured in terms of accomplishment. It's in alignment with what I do, who I'm in service to, how much I'm loving. Those to me are the elements that make me on a path to mastery. Because I don't know that you're ever there, but it is aspirational.
I love the integration of mastery because in some, there's so much unhelpful ideas out there, unhelpful programming. And I think a lot of people that get into spirituality when it comes to business and excellence, they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, where there's this, oh, well, I'm no self. I'm not doing anything. And that just isn't the reality of actual spiritual masters, in my opinion, and anybody that's achieved mastery. It's like they actually are incredible and refined and honed in their gifts and what they're creating in the world. And so, yeah, like let's embrace that. Like, why not have that as well as the expanded awareness?
Right. And you help other people find their path to their own, because often it's a path. As I say, it sounds like it's a destination, but I think the line keeps moving to the extent there is one. Right? That mastery it's fluid. It's not.
It's an infinite game, one might
Yes.
say.
Yeah.
So I think, there's probably a lot of companies and people out here that hear things like, okay, inspire love. That's a nice idea, but how is this actually going to help us be better? How are we actually going to have results improve by this paradigm? And I'm wondering what your answer would be, as well as if you have any cool stories of people that you've worked with or witnessed who've kind of embraced this and the transformation that happened after.
I can't think of any stories that are sort of concrete enough that would convince someone per se, but I can speak on my own behalf and say that I would tell my teams, I love you guys. I would say that. And nobody flinched, because and they knew that I meant it. Now, did I like everybody? I like some more than others, but I walk around with a basic love of humanity. And I don't know why more of us can't do that. I don't have to like you. I learned that distinction. My parents helped me learn that. They're like, "We love you unconditionally. We'll always love you. We're not always gonna like some of the stuff you do or say, okay? But we'll love you always."
Let's talk about bringing your whole self to work. If you're like many executives, including myself at one point, you might be living a double life. You have your personal career, and then you have your personal growth journey. Conscious Talent is changing that as the world's first executive talent firm specializing in connecting leaders and companies who embrace inner work. Imagine finding job opportunities where your contemplative practice, latest retreat experience, and commitment to your personal evolution are seen as strengths, not secrets. What if you actually felt like your career supported this aspect of your life versus competed with it? Conscious Talent is building a community of leaders and companies who are committed to both combining professional excellence with personal transformation. If you're ready to merge your two worlds with a fully aligned career, join the movement at conscioustalent.com. Here you can sign up for our talent collective to stay on top of future opportunities or find your next transformative team member. This is the powerful distinction, because I think a lot of people think about like, well, you like someone, and then if you really, really, really like them, then you love them, right? And you're kind of saying the inverse.
Yeah. Love is, to me, that's part of what makes us human, is our ability to love. And I'm like tingles in my legs, because I don't. When I say that, I'm looking at what's going on in the world, and frankly, it's kind of hard to feel love it's certainly not being radiated. Um, it's easier than we think. And I think we have redefined it to meet our needs. I'm not even talking about the romantic love, but as I say, as a human being, and I think if we, and this sounds very almost naive of me to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, if we could get to a place, and Christianity, other religions have this as one of their basic tenets, love thy neighbor, these kinds of things. What if we actually did? Think of how many fewer killings and assaults and all these other crimes against humanity, against one another. But I'm going to go back to my first one, which is know yourself. Because if people have never experienced love, people have grown up in some horrible situations. I think and again, I might sound naive, but I think it's possible. My father was a superintendent at a correctional facility. Okay, so and I grew up around these correctional facilities, so I know from whence certain people come, right? Where there might not have seen love or felt love, but you know what? My dad was an example of someone. He was a big man, tough man, and he had the biggest heart. He came from a place of love, and he would show respect to these people that were cast-offs in aspects of our society. And so love is contagious. It's one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And if we can remind ourselves of that and let that be our guiding principle in dealing with anyone, the bum on the street, send them love. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to give a dime. I do that all the time. I live in Chicago. I walk down the street. I see homeless people. And I'll always just send them some energy. I'll look their way and I'll just say quietly to myself, bless you. Just love, just send them love. If we could do that and get that back to the workplace, if you have love for the people that you're dealing with, you're not going to sabotage them. You're not going to, there's so many things that will not happen if you are coming from this honest place. Love is truth. And if we had truth going on, there wouldn't be corruption. There wouldn't be just this mad dash for profits. It would be like, well, right now, based on what I'm seeing, there's a serious mental health crisis going on in the world that is seeped into and largely driven by what's going on in the workplace. So I think love would be a great remedy for that. Because if people began to feel like they are enough, like they are supported, versus I'm never enough, imposter syndrome, I just can't. No, you're enough. I have love for you because you are enough in and of who you are. It's okay. So I rant on that point.
I'm here for the rant. I love it. Yeah, what comes up for me is that love comes through understanding, which comes back to the awareness piece.
And a
And
curiosity. You want to understand.
mhm.
Fair enough to understand.
And I can't help but think of Jesus and the ultimate example of being tortured and all these things and saying, forgive them for they do not know what they do. It's kind of exactly like that, where uh there's from a higher level of awareness and understanding, you can have the love and compassion, you can have the forgiveness, and you can also still have preferences of, I like that this and I don't like that, but
Absolutely.
it comes from a base of love. What do you think of these five principles that you mentioned? Is there one in particular that people have the most difficulty embracing, or maybe the one in particular that has the most questions around it when you talk about them?
um, I think the most questions tends to be because I offered a course on this a couple of years ago, and I'm going to revive it next year. It's probably around the consciousness piece, is expanding consciousness. And, again, I think these build on one another. I don't know that you can get from one you can't necessarily get to two without one, or, three without two. They truly are sequential. Um, But I think the hardest one for people to understand is expanding that consciousness. And I think for me, it's simply it can mean having that curiosity to see what else is possible in your awareness beyond what's in the physical. Get to it through meditation, through chanting, through whatever means allows you to perceive another perspective. Because to me, that's part of the love. I heard a definition recently that's the distinction between perception and perspective. We all perceive through the lens of our experiences, our beliefs, all of that, right? But how well are you, and you probably are, I know I am, I'm pretty good at, as I call it, walking around an issue. So here's my perspective, but let me observe all the other things that might be, or a number, there are probably infinite things that might be influencing this to give me a different perspective. And still it's going to be mine through my lens. It's informed by my own biases, experiences, everything else. But at least it's broader than what I might initially want to react based on, which is coming from my own thinking.
I love that idea and exercise of kind of taking a mental walk around all
Mm,
sides of an issue.
yeah.
There's a tremendous power in even just the awareness that you can do that.
Yes. And I think that's what we don't explore enough. We're so reactive that we're not necessarily harnessing some of our own power. One of my favorite books, I was mentioning this, I do a lot of coaching, and I was mentioning it to someone I was coaching, Power of Awareness, Neville Goddard. And I just think it's so brilliant and so simple, and yet we don't take advantage of the power of our own awareness and how we can shift how we think, how we perceive aspects in the world, right? Just by the focus of our attention and having a layer of understanding of our own awareness. We don't take the time. It's not necessarily in our culture.
Well, it's so interesting you say this. I recently went to I've been dealing with some medical things, and I did actually something called holographic medicine, where they um, you give them a bunch of information about you, and then they like kind of use this tech that's supposed to like read your energetic field, and it tells you about your health, but it also tells you stuff about your soul. And
Mm.
one of the things that came out of it was like, you're not fully leveraging your spiritual gifts. Like, you have a lot of gifts, and I do a lot of weird stuff, so I'm like, okay, there's more. But I really was thinking about it, and I was like, I have some practice time in the morning where I do my meditation, I do, different things. But then, like, there's a lot more balanced time of like, I'm in front of my computer, I'm cranking on things, I'm doing things. And, just coming back to the like Neville Goddard stuff, who I explored in terms of the power of imagination, was one of his big concepts. Was like, wow, like I need to like shift the balance even more into working directly with the consciousness and awareness versus like the gross material efforting. Um, and even just treat it like an experiment, right? Like, what happens when you go from like 1 or 2 hours to like maybe you spend 3 hours a day doing that kind of exploration.
Yeah.
And then you still have time to actually answer your emails or get on calls or
Well,
whatever
and
you need to
then
do.
what if you can integrate some of that? It's in your mind. It's not necessarily a cognitive activity, right? But can you integrate that in some of what you do in completing your tasks? It's a question. Because I don't know that I consciously do it, but I do sometimes check myself before I pick up that next thing or write down that next to do. Is this really my priority right now? Is this what's calling me? Is there a reason for it?
I think you can, I think you can. Like, I think, you know, just a few examples that come to mind is like, yesterday in the middle of my email, like someone canceled something on me, charged me money. I noticed this like reflex, like, oh, you're ripping me off, right? And it's like, oh, like I'm gonna like take a second and look at that. Or like another example is when I drive places, I like to close my eyes before I leave and visualize the perfect parking spot and see it as if it already is there for me. And guess what? A lot of times it is. And so these are kind of like small interspersed acts in the midst of activities where we're using the consciousness that that you can just have fun with. You can just experiment with and see what happens.
I mean, I think the point is that we have so much more influence. I started to say control, but that sounds almost manipulative, right? We have more power, let's say it that way, over ourselves and the outcomes in our life than we realize. We're creating this life versus I think too many people feel as though they're victims of circumstance. I'm not. I'm a deliberate creator. Does it always work out? No. But I make very deliberate choices because I feel as though I'm in control. I also have guidance from the non-physical. I'm not in this alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's hard to sometimes like take extreme ownership over bad, like difficult things that happen. But more often than not, as I've explored the depths of my subconscious, I see how those circumstances are being reflected back to an aspect of myself. And that is the position of power, right? Because you're like, oh shit, I actually did do this, and I wanted to go through this through my own for my own growth and evolution, and and okay, all right, now I don't want to do that again, but
Right. Well,
like
there's
that.
and there's the humility, which I think is the one of the balancing elements of power. We're in service to not just ourselves, but to others, right? And so things don't always go your way because there's a lesson to be learned.
And there's a bigger timeline that we're often not aware of, a bigger arc, and a bigger dance that's happening collectively as well. A question that I had for you. So I'm very passionate about the integration of spirituality and work, and I have this kind of vision of workplaces becoming, you know, dojos for our consciousness and our awareness and our inner development. And I see it, right? But it seems so far fetched from where we are today. And I'm curious what you think about that idea and whether you think that's where we're moving towards.
Not right now. If I look around, it wouldn't seem so. I think that's where we're going to have to be to save ourselves. I'm not trying to sound nihilistic, but I don't. We're not on a good trajectory when I think about the workplace, and the workplace is nothing but a microcosm of what's going on in the world. I think it's a great place to focus because most people work in some form. I don't care if it's in a field or in a corporate office. Work. There's a construct within which there are expectations for your behavior and demonstration of certain skills, right? Um, so I think work needs we have left people to their own devices. We haven't had strong structures to hold leaders, especially first and foremost, accountable, leaders and managers accountable for their behavior, for their choices, for the way that they treat people. And so, unless and until we're willing to do that and have consistent application of those standards and upholding them, we're allowing the systems to fail us. And that's why we have toxic work environments. And I think that's why we have so many people who have to take a leave because of poor mental health. And because, we've got leaders who are out here saying we just have to hit our numbers and get that to that next $1 trillion valuation or whatever it is. And it's done at the expense of people's well-being. And I don't think it needs to be. You can still achieve those numbers if they're all important. If they are, that's the big if. But imagine a place where the workers actually felt supported and invested. I saw something, I don't remember where it was. It was a small company where the owner decided to, like, he tripled people's um, salaries and he took a huge cut. And people were telling him he was crazy. Well, actually, it worked out really, really well. The business grew, the retention improved, all these things happened. People were able to improve their entire lifestyle. And to buy it's Henry Ford did it however many years ago, when they were starting with conveyor belts and machine production, right? Mass production. And they didn't have any things in place for the workers. I just did a series on the history of work. And so people were working 16 hours. They were getting ground up, right? There was no legislation surrounding this. There was no OSHA. And so he said, I know what I'll do. I will double whatever the factor was of the what they were paying these people on this, and we'll limit the number of hours so that they can, one, buy one of the cars that we're making and they become advertisers for those cars, right? So there are reasons why it's advantageous to treat people like human beings and pay them their worth. We've gotten way out of alignment on that.
Yeah, I think a few things come up for me. One, I don't think the correlation is like very clearly spelled out of in terms of like why you should do this. I think it's like there's the very basic low level argument of like, okay, if people are happier, they're going to be like less burned out and more productive. Like, okay, that's a very surface level why, in my opinion. And I think what comes up for me, and this is more in the spiritual domain, is that as you start to see things like karma, like the law of cause and effect, as you start to see reality as non-local, like the happenings and unfolding is not just based on like taking smart decisions and actions. It's like there's a higher order organizing principle that is driving things, that is trying to move us towards love and unity and all of these virtues that you described in 5D leadership. Like when you have that perspective, like aligning in this direction is the obvious choice. It's the obvious choice, but it's really hard because it's hard to convince people of these things because they don't have the direct experience that makes them believe in something like that. And so we're kind of in this weird haircut phase, where it's like your hair isn't quite long, it's not short. You're like, this
Yeah,
thing looks like crap. And we're in that in between phase right now is what it feels like for me.
I think we are. And I think we, how would I describe it? I think we're in denial. There's some of that. We haven't really chosen. There's a lot of programming that needs to be undone, some reprogramming of what it means to be successful. And I always go back to David Gellis, who's a New York Times journalist, did this book called The Man Who Broke Capitalism. It was all about Jack Welch. His second book, Dirtbag Billionaire, just came out, and that's about the founder of Patagonia. But in The Man Who Broke Capitalism, I remember I started recruiting. I came out of graduate school during the Jack Welch era. And when I got to Spencer Stewart in the late 90s, it was in full bloom, meaning, the smartest people were at GE. And at one point, I think there were 16 leaders out of GE who were running Fortune 500 companies as CEOs. So there was a prototype that was being cast through Jack Welch. And arguably there were parts of it that were quite good, right? But there were parts that were not so good, both in terms of what the expectations were for the leader, but also some of his orientation about shareholder value at all cost, at the expense of the well-being of the individual. He didn't say that, but that's what showed up. But that die was cast in the United States and modeled in other parts of the world for decades. And I think we're seeing the remnants of it now. And I don't know that we have established anything to counteract that, other than maybe in my own mind, it's fifth dimensional leadership. But sometimes we look for heroes. We look for a company that we want to champion this movement. Um, yeah. So when I think back to how did we get here, I think those are some of the events that led us to this place in the workplace at very high levels. And there's a trickle down effect because it ceased to value and prioritize families and communities. It was all about, remember, was it, oh, I'm not going to remember the name of the guy, but he had slash and burn was kind of the whole mindset. They buy the company, break it up for parts, throw away everything, no concern for the implications on the people. And, I think we're paying the price of that mindset.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people that think that AI is going to maybe be what kind of gets us out of that habit where there's like there's so much more abundance, right? But what I don't see is like if the consciousness doesn't shift, the AI is just going to be another tool for the same paradigm. It's just going to be like, okay, well, if I can, treat people poorly and have AI do everything and have AI be way more profitable, well, then I'm going to go do that. And there just hasn't been a good argument to me around like with a lot of these leaders of like, here we are today, and then AI, crazy abundance. And it's like, okay, well, what happens in between? And there just hasn't been a ton of great explanations for that.
No, and I think it's a serious gap that requires a lot more thinking, because we're human beings. We're still the ones. Allegedly, what do they say about humans? Are we the smartest ones? I sometimes wonder about that. At least
We're
on
the
the
best
planet.
parasites on the planet.
Right. Yeah, but my thinking is not limited to this planet. I think there are plenty of other more intelligent life forms on other
I would
planets. I actually
I
do.
would
That's
agree.
my belief. Yeah. I think they're probably looking down at us or around or whatever, or here among us and going, "Oh my God, how primitive these people are."
I think you're probably right. I did hear on the notion of the contrast between AI and human intelligence. I did hear something really cool recently where the amount of I guess like power it would take to execute the processes of the human body
Mm,
is something like 500 nuclear power plants for one person.
I never heard that.
And so like, we're all really, really hot on AI and how great and fancy it is, but like we're this like massive, massive, massive intelligence that we just do not have the same level of respect for.
No, we're not even aware.
That's right. And that's the reason is because we're so unaware of how intelligent we truly are.
I agree, and I think you might have just unlocked the reason why we are where we are, because we have to learn this lesson before we can move ourselves to the next level. We can't. We're looking. We I think we've spent way too much time looking outside of ourselves, and now I think if I do one thing, it would be, as a leader, to make sure and have regular conversations about the humanity of us in this workplace, so that we're not, because we're enamored right now. Wow, hey, I use it. I do. Absolutely, I do. But I've always felt that my consciousness is more powerful than that. When it comes down to whatever it is in the moment, making a decision, I have arms and legs. There are things that I can do that it can't. I mean, arguably a robot, but feelings that I can express, hearts that I believe I want to heal, a touch that I can offer someone that can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And, for me, what comes up is just like the inner guidance and intuition where like as you purify yourself, that becomes more available. And I had a cool experience this morning with that, where we're doing a search at my company, Conscious Talent, right now, and it's a pretty complex one. And just as I was sitting down, like random people coming into my awareness who actually are perfectly suited to at least know the right person just started emerging. And I don't, what comes into your awareness is not an accident.
No,
Like
never.
that's how I live. It's like always perfect. And I think, as you start to kind of like have a reverence for that, you start to follow those nudges, and amazing things happen. And that type of like seeing around corners, you can't, an LLM can't do that. It
There's no
can't.
prompt for it.
Yeah.
Because it's tapping into, um, it transcends thought. I'm clairaudient, so in my meditation, I sometimes get messages, but in day to day, sometimes I just get a feeling, and it's just literally in my heart chakra where I'll sense something. It's not always an alarm. It's not always bad, but it might mean I'm going to pick up the phone and call my best girlfriend. You know, and there's richness in that.
One thing I am excited about, and this might be kind of related to the longer arc, is that if everyone has the most expansive intellect in their pocket, it becomes a commodity. Like knowledge in the traditional form of fact memorization and all that kind of stuff becomes a commodity. And so what that means is that this kind of right hemisphere, creative, intuitive, expansive intelligence becomes more of a novelty and becomes something that's more, yeah, just more valued by
I
our
like that.
society.
Yes.
And so I think, like, in a weird way, I see a path where AI is actually going to help us lean more deeply into our consciousness and our evolution and the things that make us uniquely human. But it might take a little bit while. It might take a little bit.
And it might not. I mean, right now there's all the buzz because it's not fully out there, but it might only be a few years. I feel like time is speeding up. The whole construct is shifted. So I want to believe it could be sooner that we realize, and that it awakens. I hadn't even allowed myself to think about this. I wasn't catastrophizing anything necessarily, but the stuff that you read every day is just, look at how AI can do this and that and that and this. And it's like, so many young people, I think especially, are feeling irrelevant. And in fact, I know someone who was told that if they don't double down on their work harder, they will become irrelevant. And I'm thinking, gee, way to go. That's how you motivate somebody. But moreover, I thought, you're dampening the spirit of that person. You're telling them they're worthless. When in fact, we have so many gifts that we can bring into this world, that because no one has told us that they're valuable, we don't think that they are.
Yeah. Well, I hope the narrative changes as well. And I would agree that there does seem to be an acceleration of more and more people getting in touch with these gifts. So maybe we finish up with this last question. Like, I know you got a lot of cool things you're working on. I want to give you an opportunity to just share more about what those things are,
Oh, you're
because
sweet.
I'm personally curious, and
Yeah.
I think the listeners might also be excited about learning about that.
No, thank you. Well, Um, I spend most of my time, I do a lot of speaking. I work through a speakers bureau, so I love talking about that, and conscious leadership being at the top of the list for most of the speeches. I'm working on my second book. The first one was called Career Mapping. It came out in 2011. I'm working on the second one. I can't reveal the title yet. It's not yet sold to a publisher, but we're almost there. But it really is around the 5 dimensions of conscious leadership. So I'm very excited about that. I'm I'm working maybe on another podcast. I have one that is still available called Fifth Dimensional Leadership. It hasn't been in production for a few years, but it's still up. And some of the episodes are, I think, still quite relevant. I do executive coaching. I'm about to launch a new community, online community. What else? Is there more? There's probably a couple other things I'm not thinking about, but those are sort of
You're a busy person over there.
I got a lot
You got a
going
lot
on.
cooking.
Yeah, but it's all from this place of it's purposeful. This is the most purposeful work I've ever done. 35 years in corporate, and I finally said, let me integrate everything I've learned, everything I've come to know about myself, what I believe in, and hopefully help other people make sense of what's going on in the world now and set a course for themselves to help us build a better world. Call me Pollyanna, but that is my greatest hope.
Well, I'm right there with you, and feel equally filled professionally, advocating for this stuff and supporting others.
This is great. And kudos to you, by the way, for doing the work that you do. I love that we were connected. So we need conscious leadership in the world. So keep bringing it.
Thank you. Yeah, we're gonna make it happen. And is Ginny Clarke your website? Is
It
that the
is
best place?
GinnyClarke.com. Yes.
Awesome. And highly recommend the Instagram follow. You have some great content on there as
Thank
well, and
you.
YouTube.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're all over the place for people on the internet. So
Yeah,
I'll
I
link
guess
all
that's
those
the other
out.
thing I do is I create content. Yes. So that's no small thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ginny. We're looking forward to learning more about your book when that's ready to go, and we'll continue following along in the meantime.
Scott, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.